And with me to break it all down is soon-to-be former Secretary of State, Trey Grayson. And Secretary Grayson, one of the last times I'll get to call you that. Thanks for being with me.
Glad to be here.
And of course, you're heading off to Harvard to head up the Institute of Politics at Harvard University at the end of the week, right?
Yeah, I'm actually getting in the car on Saturday and driving up part of the way on Saturday, then the rest of the way on Sunday, and I start the new job on Monday.
Well, congratulations again. And
thanks.
Of course, you stuck around to see what candidates would file, and that filing deadline was yesterday. Mm-hmm. We now know in the governor's race, there's a three-way primary for the Republican nomination for governor. And I'm curious, Bobby Holtzclaw was kind of the late filer. If there was a surprise this week, it was her joining David Williams and Phil Moffitt in that governor's race. What do you think?
The Republican primary strikes me as pretty similar to the 2003 Republican primary, at least based upon what we know today. And for folks who remember back to 2003, then Congressman Ernie Fletcher got in the race and secured a lot of the establishment, a lot of party leaders, a lot of elected officials all across the state. But he had a couple of credible candidates in the primary. Then judge executive, or actually I guess she had just been a former judge executive with merger. The position had been gone away. Rebecca Jackson from here in Jefferson County, and then State Representative Steve Nunn. We're running in that race also. Also State Senator Virgil Moore.
Right. Right.
So you had a couple of somewhat credible candidates. The problem for the other candidates is they had really a lot of difficulty raising money, building an organization, and making a case that would allow them to really compete in that race. And so Congressman Fletcher, soon to be Governor Fletcher, was able to run more of a general election kind of campaign. He had the stumbles. He had the running mate issue, but
Hunter Bates. Hunter Bates did get kicked off the ballot there, which was a huge distraction right before the primary.
It was. But as far as he was able to overcome that, and he really wasn't threatened other than by the judge's decision and the kind of the courts of Kentucky. I think that strikes me what we're going to see here. Having watched Phil Moffitt campaign around the state, he's a fresh voice. He's got business experience. He's trying to run on the Tea Party label, and I think justifiably so. But he doesn't appear to be getting the kind of traction either at the grassroots level or certainly at the financial level to really compete against Senate President David Williams. And it remains to be seen whether County Clerk Holtzclaw, who I've enjoyed working with her over the years, and she's a fine county clerk and has always gotten a lot of votes here in Jefferson County, it's not clear that she'll have the grassroots or the money to be able to compete against David. So he may be able to focus, he meaning Williams, on the fall campaign, continue to campaign against Beshear, and really avoid a divisive primary, which is what you want to have if you're going to have to run against an incumbent governor.
Do you think Holtzclaw would even be able to get to that threshold that Rebecca Jackson did, that 27%, or are she and Phil Moffitt just going to split the anti-David Williams vote in the primary?
My sense is they're probably going to split the vote. Rebecca had been a county clerk and had been a very well-regarded judge executive and had traveled a lot throughout the state in those positions. She was really better known throughout the state, and even she struggled with that statewide race against Governor Fletcher. So again, anything can change between now and May. Maybe fundraising will pick it up. Maybe David will make some mistakes and things like that. But just looking here today, this strikes me as a primary that's similar to 2003, which should result in a pretty comfortable win for David Williams.
Well, you mentioned Phil Moffitt and the fundraising troubles there. Is there anything that I guess astute viewers can read into that about what that says about the Tea Party and its role in this 2011 governor's race?
Well, one of the things that made Rand Paul so powerful was the ability to tap into his father's fundraising network around the country. And he'd earned that. As we talked earlier, he'd earned that because he really was a surrogate for his dad in a lot of respects. And those followers of his father knew Rand and knew that he was similar to his dad, and so they were willing to buy in. Phil doesn't benefit from that. Now, the one thing he does have potentially that's out there is we saw this in the Senate races last year, when in Delaware in particular, when a bunch of third-party money came in on behalf of Christine O'Donnell. Didn't come to her campaign, but third-party groups came in, ran ads against the establishment candidate, and that really helped to propel her to victory. And without that money, she wouldn't have been able to do it. So it's possible that you could see a third-party effort come in, and that could just be a group deciding to do it on its own. With $1,000 increments, raising money inside a campaign can be difficult in these gubernatorial primaries. And to date, you haven't seen any ability for Moffitt to really do that. And it's one of those catch-22s. If you don't raise money, people are less willing to invest in you because they don't feel like you have a chance. And even though there may be some national interest in this race, I'm not sure that in the last few months that Moffitt has shown that he can run the kind of campaign worthy of an investment from folks around the country.
Well, money aside, I mean, he still has some high-profile Tea Party associated bloggers like Micah Sims, who really campaigned on or really advocated on behalf of Rand Paul.
Sure.
So he's still got that. But does this mean that that's not as important in a governor's race, or has the Tea Party support maybe eroded in general?
Well, I think if we go back to the poll race, I think it was too simplistic to say it was just the Tea Party that put Rand in. I mean, he brought a lot to the table. He also had an important ally in Fox News. He was on, and actually I think this afternoon he's going to be on Fox talking about his budget plan. He was on there a lot, was able to get name ID, and people watched him and said, hey, I kind of like this guy. I think he's going to go stand up to the folks in Washington, which is what the primary voters on the Republican side really wanted. That's my interpretation of the election. Phil doesn't have that kind of opportunity. So if you were to ask the average Republican primary voter in Kentucky, they don't know who Phil Moffitt is, let alone have any kind of informed opinion of him. And so that's where the money has to come in, because he's not going to get the kind of earned media that Rand was able to generate because of who he was.
So looking ahead then to the fall, I mean, you're a Republican, so you talk to a lot of Republicans.
Yeah.
Do you hear people saying, look, David Williams is just the best matchup for the party against Steve Beshear?
Well, I mean, right now he is the best. Yes. Compared to who's on the race, yes, I think that's right. Now, I do think that David has to do some work inside the party. Everybody who's ever been to Frankfurt and spent much time, a lot of citizen groups come through for their local communities. Everybody's got a David Williams story that's usually not very positive. But the flip side of that is they also have a lot of issues where David has been right there where Republican Party activists want him to be. He's fought the good fight. He's stuck his neck out. As he said, I've got the scars to prove it. So he's got a lot of things going for him. But I think that this primary might give him an opportunity to solidify that support, and so people really are excited. The other side of that is once he's the nominee, even if there's any doubts, there's no question in my mind that a vast majority of Republicans are going to prefer him to Steve Beshear and are going to work hard on his behalf. So this primary, though, is kind of a nice test. It won't be too difficult of a test, I don't think, and it may result in him being able to mount a much more formidable challenge in the fall with a more unified party behind him.
Of course, then it's a matter of getting some of these registered Democrats to switch party, and that's a whole other conversation.
Right, exactly.
I do want to touch on the Attorney General's race.
But actually, if we can go back, because I think this matters is Beshear escaping a primary is a big deal.
How so?
Well, he doesn't have to he can spend his money completely with regard to the general election. He doesn't have to run campaign commercials unless he wants to. He may be able to avoid some of the candidate forums because he can say, I'm busy being the governor and I don't have a primary. There won't be a KET debate because he doesn't have a primary. So he was a big winner yesterday. Even though he was the incumbent, obviously he was going to probably prevail over Otis Hensley if Mr. Hensley
that's
got
what I was going to say. I mean, really, Otis Hensley was the only one still talking about running in the Democratic primary, and he didn't show up on filing deadline, so it's Beshear's to win, or Beshear's now.
But he'd have to go on some of these candidate forums to, he could slip up. He's going to have to face some tough questions. So I think he certainly, he was going to win and win by a lot, but it'd be much rather to not have a primary, I believe.
And obviously, being the governor's race, there's no name recognition bump he can get from the primary.
Exactly, yeah.
So another two races that don't have primaries and aren't races is the primaries for Attorney General, and that's Todd People in the Republican Party, the Hopkins County Attorney, and then Attorney General Jack Conway running for re-election. Yeah. Are you surprised on how that went down? Were you expecting a primary on the Republican side? Were you surprised Jack Conway finally pulled the trigger?
Well, for Jack, I figured that ultimately Jack would end up running, but I haven't gone through the decision myself about whether to run this year or not. I know what he was going through. It was a tough call. I didn't even know his wife was pregnant with their second child. That made it even a harder decision. But ultimately, I thought he would, as an incumbent who could run for re-election, who's the favorite in the race, that he would decide to go ahead and do it. Again, he won't have a primary, so he can focus on family, focus on getting organized, and getting back into fighting shape for the fall. I was surprised that somebody didn't file just a token candidate, if anything, in the Republican side. We've always had multiple candidates in these AG primaries. And so I thought somebody might just want to run.
Of course, not anybody can file for Attorney General. You actually have to be a lawyer.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, but you have these attorneys who think they would love to be the Attorney General someday. They get on the ballot, and so I thought somebody like that might run. But once Chief Justice or former Chief Justice Lampert dropped out, this nomination was going to be people's to lose. And again, he's a big winner yesterday because now he can go around the state and introduce himself to Republican activists, to attorneys, and to those swing Democrats. Say, I'm the Republican nominee for Attorney General. He can save his money, he can get organized. And I can tell you, when I first ran in 2003, it was a big benefit to be able to introduce myself to people as the nominee. It allowed people to get on board earlier and that helps you to get even more support. So he's breathing a big sigh of relief, and he was, I think, again, a big winner, even if it had been token opposition. The other thing we learned in 2003, going back to that, was even token opposition can pose problems.
Yeah.
Asked Tim Feely, who's
in the Attorney General's race.
Right.